They didn't realize, I think, just what they were doing, and at least the public wasn't aware of what was happening.
It wasn't until after the building was torn down that there was a public outcry to save historic sites.
The whole central core of downtown St. Paul was basically taken down and replaced with new buildings. So there was no guarantee that this building, despite its obvious quality, was going to be saved.
There was thought of demolishing this building, and many people wrote to the mayor, who was George Vavilas, I believe at that time, and protested that. And so he did what probably any intelligent mayor would do. He appointed a committee, and the committee was called the Committee to Save the Old Federal Courts Building.
In 1968, there was a private group that wanted to acquire fee title to this building, but to get title to this building, they were being requested to construct an off-street parking ramp to serve the needs of those employees that are housed in a new post office building.
Well, so this headline appears, old post office or old federal courts building to be traded for parking lot. Well, that day, hundreds of people read that and were very alarmed and thought the next thing is they're going to mow this building down. So we heard this from Washington, we heard it from the mayor's office here. The phones rang off the hook for a week, people calling to protest. That was the evidence that we needed to have our public officials recognize how the public cared about the building. One of the things Mayor Byrne insisted that we do when we got this committee established was to do kind of a test canvas of the community. So we put some ads in the paper, and money rolled in from John Q. Public.
A successful petition results in the building's addition to the National Register of Historic Sites, and the Committee to Save the Old Federal Courts Building becomes Minnesota Landmarks, a nonprofit organization.
We should not turn our backs upon these quiet, stately, authentic reminders of our heritage. As we look upon these structures, we hear voices of past heroes, strengthening our resolve to create a future that will be worthy of them.
Now that the Old Federal Courts Building has official designation as an historic site and overwhelming public support, only one final problem remains. The building is still owned by the GSA, the General Services Administration.
Frank Marzatelli persuaded the city fathers to take title by guaranteeing them that the private sector would pay for the restoration and the renovation of the building if the public sector would agree to take title and agree to annual maintenance and operation. So this public-private partnership that developed around this project is very key to the preservation story.
In 1972, Congressman Joseph Carth pays $1 to transfer title from the GSA to the city of St. Paul. 3 months later, the title is transferred from the city to Ramsey County. In 1973, Betty Musser becomes president of the St. Paul Arts and Science Council and will play a significant role in the building's restoration efforts for the next several decades. The committee submits a restoration plan to reuse the Old Federal Courts Building as an historic monument.
And she got control enough to persuade all the arts agencies that their best bet for increased space, better visibility, fundraising support with a big project like this. So they all decided they would come over here as the new tenants.
The committee distributes a nationwide request for proposals to restore and renovate the building. 2 architectural firms seem especially qualified, Stahl Bennett of Boston and Windsor Pharisee of St. Paul.
We asked those 2 who had both applied to be the major one, we asked if they would work together, and they did, and it was a very happy marriage.
Committee members donate furniture and give tours. The fundraising begins in earnest.
practically anyone who was asked gave what they could.
Ted Ham really was interested from the beginning in the building.
On his own, without being solicited, began sending quarterly sums of, say, $7,000 to $12,000.
Until finally it had accumulated to being one of the larger gifts.
Ham's 30-year pledge is for $900,000, about twice the size of the next largest pledge.
That was the kind of evidence that other big philanthropists lying in the weeds watching this, that's what they needed to see that it had appeal and credibility.
The public-private partnership continues as significant contributions come from individuals, from leading community foundations, and corporations. The renovation and restoration can finally begin.
We began, as they began dismantling the building, to find things that nobody knew were there. For instance, and one of the things the architects found was that the company that made the tiles for the roof was still in business, and they still had the original molds. And that was a tremendous thrill.
We found 600 original tracing, not blueprints, the original ink drawings on linen in the post office. So it was just a wonderful thing.
The building's exterior, however, is covered with grime. Pollution has turned the lovely St. Cloud granite to a dark, sooty gray.
We washed it. We didn't sandblast it, which would have been environmentally destructive. And there was a great opposition to that. And it got into being a big semantic furor about what was grime and what was patina.
I think we were all a little worried about how it would look afterward, and it, of course, beautiful granite, that pink granite, the color came out, and it took some getting used to. But there was no doubt it was the right thing to do.
Many people said, well, how can you restore this building? These craftsmen are gone. The craftsmen aren't gone. We redid the plaster work with modern day plasterers. They liked the challenge. We redid the woodwork with modern day carpenters. You know, they liked the challenge.
And I remember watching in the Chief Justice room, watching the months that it took for the man who was up there getting the paint off, this awful paint that was everywhere, and the skylights were covered up with paint. And that meticulous, painstaking cleaning had to be done before it would be complete. It was really a tremendous effort that went on from 1972 until we opened in September 1978.
As the private restoration and fundraising continues, the responsibility for management of the building is transferred from the St. Paul Arts and Science Council to Minnesota Landmarks. Prior to the grand opening, the building's name is changed. The new name? Landmark Center.
We all agreed the building should be open to the public first, and so Alder Mondale opened the building during the day, and we had all kinds of affairs going on just before. We put flowers all over the building, and the effect was marvelous. It was very festive. We had guided tours. Joan Mondale was the speaker for the evening. There were all kinds of donations of time and effort. And Tad Stoll and I were looking down before people were seated, and he said, "My God, Meredith, it looks like the Paris Opera." He was really just thrilled. We all were. It was just a great evening.
When we finished the restoration, the American Institute of Architects awarded us their Merit Prize and called it the best creative reuse the committee had seen.
You know, the reality is once you get a building saved, the battle's not over. Then you have to come up with operating money to keep it going, and you have to keep on finding things that will fit into your building.
So we quickly regrouped and decided Minnesota Landmarks would program the building in ways that would fill in between other kinds of programming. So we started to rent the building for significant events in people's lives, landmark occasions we call them.
Jim and Marilyn Anderson are proud to announce the wedding of their daughter, Susan Lynn Anderson, to James Andrew Glover. The ceremony will take place at St. Paul's Landmark Center, October 9th.
I generally just say we're a multicultural center, but I think our challenge is to tell people that you can do these kinds of things with an old building, and that an old building can spark a sense of civic pride and a sense of space in an urban population.
It took a really dedicated effort on the part of a lot of sort of volunteers, people who were just interested in the building, plus a lot of public officials who had a feel for and understanding for the building and who wanted to save it.
I think that this building and the collection of things around it have become situated within the identity of St. Paul as a city. And that's a pretty important role to continue to play.
Our very own little romantic fairy tale castle for St. Paul. So I hope it'll continue on for many, many years.
It was like being in a great big game and winning.
Designed more than a century ago, built to last, saved for future generations, planted squarely in the center of downtown St. Paul and in the hearts of Minnesotans everywhere. A work of art serving people. Landmark Center.